Hello, and welcome to this episode of Touchy Topics. I'm so excited. I'm here with Jess Osie. Welcome, Jess.
Hi.
Hi. Jess is a Vedic meditation teacher, community builder, and facilitator. And I first met Jess when her and her husband Tony came to Bali to do an in-person retreat with James and I around their relationship and relationship after baby. So it's really special. I think that was 4 years ago, right?
Mm.
Yeah,
It was 4 years ago.
4 years ago, yeah. And since then, we've become friends and shared about motherhood and the journey of motherhood and relationships. And so, this conversation in particular, we're going to focus on mostly the transition from one baby to two babies. So, with
Mhm.
all that, welcome, Jess. So glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here. And yeah, thanks for introducing me in that way. I feel like it's really important to presence the work that we did together. It was so pivotal to supporting our relationship and actually, as we move into the conversation talking about transitioning into number two, a lot of what we worked on supported that transition. So I'm happy to
Mm.
share.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think about you too often, actually, because some of the challenges that you brought up that you wanted to work on, I felt
Mm.
myself in becoming a mom and in my relationship. And I have so much more empathy now for couples after baby because it is such a unique and tender time. Yeah.
Totally. I remember thinking that. I remember thinking you're going to have a baby and you're going to really understand the challenges that we brought to you and James as to, this incredible relationship that we had and built on prior baby and worked through any challenges. And then baby number one comes along and it's like, oh my gosh, we don't have nearly the amount of time or inner resource to deal with the little ruptures that come up, and never mind the big ones or how the big ones become unearthed because of these big transitions in our lives. So yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe let's start there. What were some of
Mm,
the big challenges you felt in becoming a mother in your relationship? And what are some things that helped you move through those?
sure. Um, it's interesting. I feel like I'll just speak to the core emotion that Tony and I experienced the first time round, which was resentment. And it was a really icky, kind of horrible thing to experience, especially based on what I was just saying of having this really strong, deep love, and not necessarily experiencing that emotion prior to. And I think the cause of it was, this big thing happens in your life, and on a very practical level, you're not sleeping, so you're not getting much time to yourselves to regulate yourself. And then there are these kind of tiny windows where you're meant to top yourself up and kind of come together supposedly back into the relationship. And I feel like the baby, it takes so much of your attention, and innately you pour your attention into that. So there's this kind of missing out unless you're consciously practicing, which is partly the support that you gave us, and the tools was to put conscious attention and conscious awareness and creating structure around that to feed the relationship and to create that virtuous cycle of, nourishing the relationship and then feeling nourished by it and then wanting to nourish it again. But I think prior to connecting with you and James and us doing that intensive together, we were both feeling so dried up in ourselves in terms of our resource. And then when one of us wanted to do something for ourselves as a means of topping up, the other would sort of feel, but hold on a second, I haven't had my needs met. And there was quite a lot of it was petty in a way. It was like this tit for tat, and oh, if you do that, well then I need to do this for myself. And it was quite a horrible existence to be in. And I guess it's the opposite of a virtuous cycle. It was like this kind of measuring of each other's time and trying to control each other's time. And I think it's probably just grasping at the sense of control at all, because then, you know, as you know, when you have a baby, that fallacy reveals itself. There is no control, actually. So yeah, our relationship that first year after baby number one was probably the hardest. We've been together for a solid almost 12 years, and that was probably the hardest, most rupture-filled, intense experience for our relationship. And it really took us by surprise as well, because we were known to our friends, and we considered ourselves to be this like incredible couple that just does everything together, works through everything, has super conscious relating, and then all these kinds of pretty hard to hold experiences came along. And yeah.
I love the way you put that. It's so relatable. I was giggling to myself as I heard you say that, because I felt the same way in our relationship as a new mom. And I remember I was texting with a mom who had 4 kids, and she said, "Have you hit the resentment wall yet?" And I was like, "What do you
Yeah.
mean, the resentment wall?" And she said, "That moment when you just feel so resentful towards your partner." And I hadn't then, but then a few months later I was like, "Oh yeah, yep, we've hit it." and and I think, to your point, it is like this loss of control. It's like, so our capacity is stretching, both of us. We're like, this baby's asking us to go beyond our existing capacity to grow. And so we're stretched and tired and sleep deprived. And also there's, I think, a lot of unprocessed grief too in becoming a mother. Like for me, one of the biggest things was the loss of freedom. You know, if my partner, he left to go do a 2-day men's course, and I was so jealous because I was like, I can't leave for 2 days. I'm breastfeeding around the clock. And so I think creating a real space for these kind of more intense feelings is super important.
And then the other thing that made me think of as well is the, you know, whilst we're in a modern couple, and there's, you know, the desire to contribute equally doesn't necessarily mean the same. And the first time round, we had absolutely no idea about what the other was experiencing. We both thought we had it hardest, you know, and I would kind of go on, "Oh, I've been with the baby all day after a sleepless night, and I am breastfeeding around the clock, and you know, I'm carrying the mental load." And I kept trying to, I think a lot of that first year was me trying to explain to him why it was so hard and advocating. And he would say, you know, "It's really hard for me. Like, I have to leave the baby and be responsible." You know, that was the setup at that time for the first year for us, be responsible for the finances and the load of that, and the pressure of that, but then also coming home and being expected to contribute and hold the baby and also be up and, you know, so it felt like a really lack of understanding and capacity to even try perceive what the other was experiencing.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really operating in 2 separate worlds, 2 different realities. That was something that surprised me as well after baby. My midwife had said, "Be prepared to go back to like 1950s gender roles after having a baby." I was like, "No, you know, I'm a feminist. My husband's a feminist. We're committed to equal parenting." But it is actually, I was shocked by how many things were specifically for the mother. Like, I'm the only one that can breastfeed. I'm the only one that can give birth. In a lot of ways, I was the one the baby wanted first. And so he picked up a lot of the finances, the households, running our businesses. And it did feel like a bit of a shock to the feminist in me to feel that.
Yeah, I fully hear you.
Yeah, so interesting. So what helped you to turn things around after that challenging first year?
Megan and James.
Well, thank you. That's very sweet. You guys also did amazing work together.
I feel like we really did reach out to you at a point where we knew our relationship needed like a cycle break. We had done approximately the first year, and we'd been operating with very little bandwidth and also very few tools. And then we kind of made this decision, like we needed to do something dramatic, and we booked a ticket to Bali and did, I think it was about 6 days with couples coaching 2-on-2, which is such an incredible experience because it was so tailored to us. And I think I'll just speak to that a little bit, but we, with you guys, the first day we did a little bit of kind of, I guess, digging and looking at where things weren't so good. But then the rest of the time we looked at where things were good, or we looked at building how to make things good. And I found that a really beautiful and powerful structure, with the emphasis on building a virtuous cycle, or with the emphasis on nourishing the relationship, because we watched even within 6 days of how whenever we fed the relationship, or through that time, like simple things, our sexual connection was most alive, and our generosity with one another, even outside the coaching, was like, do you want to go read your book for a while? He was like, who are you? I was like, oh, the baby. And then we would kind of had this, and it continued. I mean, of course, we then had to go home and integrate it. And so perhaps to answer your question, like what were the tools that helped to turn it around? We practice a lot of gratitude and a lot of appreciation, which is something that you guys taught us. How we do it a lot, maybe even daily, or we move through phases where we do it daily. And simply appreciating each other and stopping and taking the time to really see how the other is showing up, and really see, sometimes it's how the other is giving to the family or to the relationship. Other times it's just admiration for what the other is doing. But I think that exchange has helped us to get out of our own worlds and really see what the other is experiencing. And that feeling of appreciation, it's almost like the opposite of resentment is kind of, I guess, inversely related to appreciation. And yeah, so that's been really huge. And I think something that we took from the coaching was this generosity of spirit. We decided that we didn't want to be petty, and we realized and saw within a short period of time that by being generous, the whole thing fed itself. So that had such a flow-on effect. 4 years later, we still operate in that way. It's so much more even advocating for the other, looking for where we can support the other to see when the other person's needs aren't being met. And it's almost like we almost do that as a better job for one another. It's like, oh, I can see your nervous system over there is like a bit rocked, or it looks like you haven't had any time for yourself, or you seem to be having a hard time with XYZ. Go do this. I've got this, or do you need this? It's just, there's so much more thought about how the other person must be experiencing life, and a desire to support them. And it's not that we didn't have the desire to support them before. I think we just didn't have the knowledge, and we weren't practiced in it. We weren't practiced at operating even with narrow bandwidth, as to actually, when you support the other, it feeds the whole system. And I think that's something that has been really pivotal to the way that we think about our family of 4. Going from a relationship and a baby, which is like your family of 3, to now being a system. And we kind of use that word quite a lot, like it's a unit, it's an entity. And now it's not just the relationship, but it's like our eldest, who's now 5, and she was almost 4 when our little son Amit came. Our eldest Indy, when her needs are out of balance, it's like, oh, she's pulling the family unit that way. So we attend to that, and it kind of, it balances I'm using hand gestures.
Oh my gosh. There's so many gold nuggets in what you just shared. So I'm going to just like tease it apart first, and then I want to hear about the system of 4.
Yes.
But the first one is, I love what you said about the key being the generosity of spirit. And that you two got to a point where you're like, we need a pattern interrupt, a cycle breaker, you called it. I think that's so powerful to just notice And then I remember when you were with us that week, how willing you both were to dive in and to unearth the things that needed to be said and felt, and then to carry on and be generous with each other. And it really, that shift that you made starts a victorious cycle, right? Where you're feeding each other, being generous, giving appreciation, being fed by the relationship versus the vicious, which is easy to get into when you're sleep deprived and exhausted and at your limits, which is, criticism, resentment, feeling unseen, feeling unheard. So yeah, just really wanted to celebrate you guys in your awareness to notice, like, okay, we need a cycle breaker, your willingness, and then your commitment to being generous with each other and to building that beautiful relationship that nourishes both of you.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm so curious about feeding the system. So just for any podcast listeners, I am pregnant with our second baby. I reached out to Jess and I'm like, Jess, tell me about the transition into having two kids. Like, what changes? What do I need to know when we go from a triad to a quad where there's four of us? So what is this feeding the system that you think about?
Well, I suppose our reality changed. Like when we gave birth to our second, I don't think we quite realized that it was no longer, us as a couple kind of going along doing couple things, but with baby in tow and almost continuing our life. For example, my work, like I returned to work very, very quickly after my eldest, and things just kind of ticked along, and in hindsight, we had so much more time than we do now. And then when baby number 2 came along, it wasn't really just the relationship plus a baby. It's not even the relationship plus now 2 babies. Well, or our daughter, as I mentioned, is 5, but it's like this system, and there are dynamics and there are relationships. So there's our relationship, there's each of our relationships with each of the kids, and then there's the kids' relationship. So there's this kind of whole entity. And I think the words that Tony and I don't think we've developed them, but we use it a lot. I don't know where we got it from, is the family nervous system, seeing the family as a nervous system in and of itself. And kind of understanding that if one person is out of balance, or if there's like a kink in the family nervous system, trying to work out where that kink is and prioritizing our attention on that. So it's not necessarily like a rule book around, oh, well, the baby's needs are this, and so it gets prioritized in the family rank like this, and the child's needs is this, and our relationship needs are this. It's kind of more looking at it as a whole functioning ecosystem. And I like nervous system because ultimately it's, I suppose, the sum of the parts of each of our nervous systems and the effect that our nervous systems have on one another. And I was just thinking, before we jumped on this call, we were madly doing dinner and the bath time and all of that. And we've got like our 5-year-old sort of going, Mom, Dad, look what I drew at school. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And her attention, like, she's not, she feels like she needs attention in that moment from both of us. And it's noise. It's just constant. And look. And then there's the baby. He's moving into that kind of almost toddlerhood. Well, he's sort of toddler, but baby toddler around expressing emotions. And he was trying to tip a bar stool, and he couldn't. And so he was having frustration. And he would just does this high-pitched scream out of frustration because he can't physically do the thing that he wants to do. And I was looking at Tony like, it's just noise. And, that's, that would be a big kink in the family nervous system. It's like, all right, what do we need to do, guys? And sometimes we talk to them as well about how they're showing up. So, the 1-year-old doesn't quite understand it yet, but will soon, in that, by making those really shrieking noises, it's hard for all of us to manage. It's hard for all of us to experience harmony in the family unit as we're trying to head towards bed and calm everything down. So kind of, I suppose the framework that we're currently operating under is looking at our family like a system. And yeah.
That's such a great analogy, because I think it's really a great way to look at it, because it's not separate people with separate needs, but what is the whole need? And it kind of echoes the way you described your relationship shift from two people trying to get their needs met to how are we feeding the relationship so it's feeding us? Right? It sounds like an expanded version of that. Is that how you think of it?
Yeah, I would say that's probably how it developed for us. You're right. Yeah, totally.
Cool. So in that situation with the family nervous system, you have, your 5-year-old that wants attention, your 1-year-old who's screaming. How do you tend to the family nervous system? What do you do?
We do lots of different things. Sometimes we'll play, like we noticed that we started playing baby Mozart and the whole family nervous system regulates to it. Like we all feel calmer simultaneously. It was
That's
kind
amazing.
of quite amazing. Sometimes it's, a distraction. Whoever's the loudest kid is who we'll need to distract, or it will be a divide and conquer where one of us will take, one kid and the other. And in this particular moment, we wanted to take them from this kind of crazy dinner situation where food was being thrown and bar stools were being dragged, to the bedroom where we do, we always give the kids a massage before the bath. And so, we also try and embody what it is that they want to do, knowing that what it is that we want to see in them, knowing that the sort of highest way that kids learn, or one of the most primary ways that kids learn, is through imitation. So in those situations, it's unlikely that we'll to try get their attention, and we'll actually just start going, okay guys, it's time. I mean, this might sound too idealistic, doesn't always work, but we'll try model what it is that we want at bath time, which is relaxation, and we'll make it playful and fun. It's like sometimes we'll tell Indy that we're about to do this really fancy spa bath where she gets to lie down, and maybe her bunnies, her toys, get to lie down with her, and the youngest one copies the oldest. So that's also another trick, is to, whatever it is that you want, try to develop that with the older one, and the little one will follow. Yeah.
Wow. It's beautiful awareness of your nervous system, their nervous system. I feel like this is kind of a new concept for families, right? Because what I imagine a lot of parents might do in that situation is be like, be quiet, I can't look at this, stop trying to tip over the stool, right? And so their nervous system's also escalated, and then it would just escalate. But really what you're saying is being aware of, like, what's my state of being? How do I regulate myself and then become the tempo that I want my kids to match? And what an empowering choice, for you and for the kids, because that's something you can control. Right? Versus your kids screaming, you can't always control that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it's, it doesn't always go that way. And of course, we feel utter frustration sometimes, and like, that we just want to scream. Sometimes we do. We'll leave the room and scream into a pillow and like come back and feel like we are a little bit more regulated to go ahead. But that's definitely top of awareness, is how it is that we each can show up and support them.
Yeah.
Support ourselves to not lose our SHIT.
Yeah. And starting with regulating yourself. I can relate. Last week we had a tricky bedtime. Lila didn't want to go to sleep, and I was frustrated because I had a plan to watch my show and take a bath, and I was so excited about my evening alone, and I was like, just sleep, baby. But she wasn't, and then she obviously can feel my frustration as well. So I had to step out of the room, have a yell, a cry, shake it out, and then came back, and I was like, okay, now I have more space to be with you. whether you
Yeah.
sleep, you don't sleep, wherever we are. But yeah.
I hear
Yeah.
you.
So I'd love to hear a little more around. I also really resonated with what you said around baby number one is like a baby and a couple. Baby number two
Mm,
is a whole system gets introduced.
mhm.
What are some of the other shifts you noticed in becoming a mama of two?
Mm. Oh my gosh. A lot. Um, I'll share a little bit and you can tell me, yeah, if there's something that you would like me to explain further. But I don't know, I kind of had this thought pop up. It's like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. You know, with one baby and another baby doesn't feel like two. It feels like many. Um,
Wow.
yeah, not to freak you or anyone else listening out, but I think the load, it feels a bit more exponential. And my felt sense as to why that is actually to do with kind of what we we're speaking about at the beginning of the conversation, which is you you have even less time to resource yourself. So with baby number one, I felt like my partner and I, even though it doesn't seem like we were very good at, negotiating time for ourselves and not having the resentment, to a large degree, we both have a strong meditation practice and we would give each other that. And, we kind of develop what it is that tops us up and refills us. And I feel like when we were very much at our edge with baby number one, you'd be able to say, here's the baby, I need to go. I need to have a bath, or I just need this moment. Can you do bedtime? And if it's a moment where it's just too hard, can you do that? I need to do this, or whatever it might be. It's much easier to plan when you're going to have space because there's kind of a babysitter, if that makes sense, between the two of you. If you're in a partnership,
Right.
that is, I'm speaking for partnerships. Whereas with number two, anytime you sort of think, oh, I'll have alone time, it's like you've got the other child. If you don't have the baby, you have the eldest. Tony and I found that we were doing a lot of divide and conquer. So I'm not sure if I was sharing this with you when we were having an earlier conversation, but the joy of sort of sharing this new transition with your partner for us was less because one of us was with one kid and the other was with the other, and primarily I was with the baby and my husband was with our eldest. And so there was less like family intimacy or relationship intimacy in terms of sharing that beautiful experience of looking at the baby while the baby's sleeping and looking at and watching the developments together and kind of having this like observing the baby. Whereas this time it's like, oh no, he's putting the eldest to bed and I'm doing the night by myself. I'm doing the night routine. I'm doing overnight on my own. So that was a really big shift. And then I guess, yeah, further to that, there's been a lot less time to take for ourselves because there's just this. And so I think the load feels exponential, maybe not because the actual load has been multiplied, although there are more dynamics to deal with. I think it's more that you have so little space for yourself. You're just not as resourced. That feels huge. I mean, I've got so many more, but yeah, let me know if you want
Yeah.
me to.
No, that's so interesting. James and I were just debating yesterday because every parent we talked to, we're like, so when we have a second baby, is it 1 + 1 = 1.5? Because some people are like, oh, it's not as hard, it's only 50% more
Oh,
work. Or is it
wow.
1 +
Yeah.
1 = 2, or 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5?
Mm,
It totally makes sense what you're saying too about the divide and conquer and that feeling. I mean, I already feel a little shift of that in our pregnancy. Like the first
mm,
pregnancy, every week we were like taking the bump pictures and reading, this is what's happening with the baby. And every week it was this couple watching the pregnancy unfold. This
Mm,
pregnancy, it's like, I think he's felt the baby kick like a handful of times, right? Whereas like every night I feel the baby kick, but
yeah,
between Lila wants the attention, Lila's my child, and or there's something else happening. It's just the attention feels much more divided than it did with the
yeah,
first pregnancy. And I can imagine that only expands once there's an actual baby here. So,
definitely. But you might
yeah.
be one of those couples where it's only 1.5.
One of those like mythical couples. God, it's not so hard.
Well, I will say on that though, one of the beautiful shifts within myself in terms of motherhood 2.0 was this really beautiful, deep inner confidence of, yeah, I've got this. Like, yes, the baby, and in our case, probably like most or many, the second baby is completely different, which no one tells you before, completely different and has different needs. But there's this sort of, for me, it was, I've done this before. I'm a mother. Like my intuition was stronger and my backing of my intuition was stronger because, yeah, like I've used that muscle of being a mother for, well, for me, it was 4 years. So that was a really beautiful, especially in the early postpartum where for the first baby, I was sort of like awake all night checking that they're breathing. And this time it's like, yeah, he's breathing. It's okay. I can go to sleep because he's breathing and I got this. And I know what it's like to be up all night and I can do that again. And then I think the second piece on that is also the knowledge and the wisdom based on having been there before, that that everything is a phase. And so for two parts, or for two, like, that's beneficial to know for two reasons. One is the hard times. For me with baby number one, it was like anytime I was in the midst of a hard time, I felt like I had no idea when it was going to end. And that was probably the most excruciating part, was like, this is so hard. And it was the sensation of, is this ever going to end? What have I got
Yeah.
myself into?
Yeah.
Whereas round two, it ends. And that's bittersweet because on the one hand, when you're in a challenge for round two, for me, this knowledge of it's just a phase, it's like, oh, well, I haven't sleep the teething thing. Okay, well, that's going to end soon, in a week, in a couple of weeks, no problem. And then simultaneously, I feel like the real beauty and knowledge of knowing that everything's a phase and everything's temporary is, it really helped me to revel in each phase, and really, like, the desire to slow down and the desire to kind of not return to work so quickly and cherish every part of it was truly there for me, because I know how quickly it goes, and everyone says that, but to know it yourself because you've already done it one time, that was really beautiful for me. It still is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense, because it sounds like that's one of those things you can only get from experience. I
Mm,
remember the first year with Lila, everyone told us enjoy every moment, it goes by so fast. But I'm like, it feels like I've lived 7 lifetimes in this year. What do you mean it
yeah.
goes by fast? It's taken forever. And it was because of what you were saying, every phase felt like, oh my
Mm,
God, I'll never sleep again. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine not breastfeeding. Like everything felt so long. And
yeah.
so it's really cool to hear that in motherhood number two, there's kind of this embodied wisdom of like, yes, this is a phase, this will pass. And also
Mm,
it sounded like this like settling into yourself as a mother, into your
mm,
intuition, into your self-trust.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Is there any spot where you've really had to trust yourself and your intuition as a mother?
Whew, good question. I've had a few spots. two that come to mind are about our son, Amit. And the first time was when I think he was about 4 months or so, and my milk supply in the first 3 months was so abundant that he was like choking on it, and unfortunately he had reflux, which added a few challenges to our journey. And so yeah, there was this phase that I went through, and it was really, really tender, where my milk at about 4 months started to regulate. He had also had a tongue tie, and I don't know that his latch ever was, it was sort of sufficient, I suppose, but I don't know that, you know, from classical terms, that it was this perfect latch. And so I think what happened, like I only know this now, I think what happened is he never really learned how to like suck and draw the milk. So by the time my milk supply regulated, to him, it felt like an undersupply. And I had this feeling of like not being sure whether it was an undersupply, whether I needed to give him formula, what I needed to do. And personally, I really wanted to fully breastfeed. That was a really strong value of mine. And it didn't make sense why the milk had dropped in terms of how I'd supported my health in the preconception, and all the herbs I was taking, and all the kind of lactation support I'd had. And it was this very weird journey for a few months where the milk supply kept swinging. And I think, you know, to answer your question, where I lent into like deep self-trust was those moments of kind of, you know, there was times where I was like teaspoon feeding him breast milk that I'd expressed, because the other part to that made this tricky was that he wouldn't take a bottle. So I could express, but he didn't know, his mouth couldn't do it, or he just couldn't learn it at that time. And it was just really, really tricky, because obviously I didn't want him to not be fed well enough. And you know, you could definitely see that he was hungry and he wanted the milk. And I felt like there was just this really tender period of maybe a week or two, but kind of intensely over a few months, where it was like, is he getting enough milk? Am I doing the right things? Should I be giving him formula to top up? Knowing that if I probably did eventually, although I kind of wasn't in the position because he wouldn't take the milk, but, you know, if I did, might that end our breastfeeding journey early, or might that disrupt things in a way that I wouldn't want to? And I think, yeah, I really persevered with like the teaspooning him milk at times, and then eventually learned that he just needed to suck. Like he just needed to actually draw the milk out, you know. And it took a while, and it took a lot of deep self-trust, and trust in my body, and trust in our connection, the mama baby connection, that this is possible, this is nature's way. I've got to do all the right things to support it. Obviously my own nervous system needs to be supported, because that can also you know, harm the milk supply. So that was a really big one for us. Yeah.
It's a great example of like being in the ambiguity of it and the unknown. You know, like I was talking to some friends this morning about, sometimes in motherhood, I just wanted the answer. You know, is this the right thing to do? Where's the rule book, or the manual, or how do I know for certain that this is the right thing? But there's not. And so I love that one of the themes that's come out in this interview is self-trust and intuition, and really listening to ourselves in those moments, like with the milk. And for me, it's with tantrums, listening to ourselves and our intuition, and then just being like, can we trust that? Even though we don't know for certain that it's right.
Yeah, totally. And you won't know. And I suppose you can kind of get feedback from the situation, and you'll only really know afterwards. And at the same time, you won't know for sure, like, was that definitely the right thing, you know? But I think the felt sense or the embodied experience of following what it is that you feel to be true for you and your baby. All the whilst, you know, in our situation, there were lots of opinions and there were lots of other ways I could have gone about it. And for sure, I did seek out professional support and guidance where I felt I needed to, but ultimately the decision, you know, I could also talk to Tony, my husband, as much about it as possible. And that particular situation was really up to me and the baby. And I think in hindsight, looking back on that, which now, you know, he just is obsessed with feeding. I was just saying to Tony today, I feel like the last few days, all I've been doing is feeding, and he's 15 months. Like, I can feel the work that was put in that moment, that reward of trusting myself and trusting him and trusting my baby, my body, sorry. Yeah, it really is nourishing, and also I think, like, reaffirms self-trust. You know, it's like when you listen to it and then you feel like it kind of lines up or it gets supported, then you keep self-trusting.
Right. Right. I think that's a really potent form of feminine leadership, is that like taking a little moment of being like, what feels true for me? Getting experts when you need, but really tuning into like what feels true for me and following it, and then looking back and saying, okay, it worked out. I can trust myself for the next step and the next step. And yeah, what a gift of motherhood.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, Jess, we're almost out of time. We've gone through so many amazing things around motherhood and how it impacts our relationships and the family nervous system and intuition and self-trust. So last question, if you were to think back to yourself before you became a mother, so 5 years ago for you, what would you want your younger self to know about this journey?
Such a beautiful question. I think the thing that's really ringing in my ears is the concept of going slow, being gentle. Yeah, like more listening to oneself, just as we were speaking about. Honoring what it is that you're doing. You're bringing life into form, which is this unbelievable miracle in and of itself. And I think I would really tell myself to value that. I have, and through the experience I've learned to value it, but it's almost like even having that prior knowledge of this rite of passage, seeing it as a rite of passage, and preparing for ways in which I might want to support myself through that rite of passage. It's kind of like you do learn on the way. And on the one hand, I was just thinking, you know, you can't really prepare. Like, it's, you can to a degree, but you don't know until you've moved through it yourself. But I would tell myself that it is the most rich, beautiful, wild, rewarding, spiritual, challenging journey that deserves lots of attention and support and nourishment, and wow, what a gift.
I felt my whole body like exhale as you were saying that, when you said what a rich journey it is, and it deserves the attention and support. I think that's such a big paradigm shift, you know, from, becoming a mother, it's like this ordinary thing, lots of women do it, no big deal, to like, wow, it's this huge rite of passage, you know, and it's huge reorientation, and the most sacred thing I've ever done, bring life to earth, and to really see it with that honor.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jess. I so appreciate having you on the podcast and also just hearing your wisdom as a friend and a friend who's a little further down on her motherhood path. I really appreciate the insights that we got today and through our conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel really honored to be on here and to be able to have this conversation. It's always so fun to talk to you.
Thank you. And if people want to connect with you, what's the best place? Website, Instagram, what would you recommend?
Yeah, both of those. I can share them with you. It's just Jess Osie on Instagram and jessosie.com. It's my website. So yeah.
Easy. Okay. We'll make sure the links are in the show notes too for people who want to go deeper with your work. And with that, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Such a pleasure. Thank you.